In the suburbs of Los Angeles, where every mansion looked like a castle and every garage held cars worth more than some people's homes, lived Richard Coleman, a self-made millionaire, or so he loved to claim. In truth, Richard had inherited much of his fortune, but he never missed a chance to remind people of his hard work. Richard's most prized possession wasn't his company, or his house, or even his watch collection. It was his car, a brand new black Tesla Model S Plan. Sleek, fast, spotless. He drove it only on special occasions. On normal days, he let his driver handle it. The driver's name was Mark Davis. Mark had been working for Richard for 4 years. He was a quiet man in his late 30s, polite, disciplined, always in a clean uniform. He had once dreamed of owning his own auto repair shop, but life had pulled him in another direction. Bills, debts, and family responsibilities had chained him to this job. To Richard, Mark was just another accessory like the car itself. "Mark," Richard would say, sliding into the back seat with his sunglasses on, "when you drive my Tesla, remember it's not just a car. It's a statement. People see it, and they know I'm better than them." Mark would nod silently, his hands gripping the steering wheel. But every insult, every arrogant laugh from the back seat, every time Richard called him just the help, it all carved scars into Mark's pride. The breaking point came one Friday night. Richard had hosted a party at his mansion. He was drunk, loud, bragging about his wealth. In front of his rich friends, he pointed at Mark and laughed. "This guy, my driver, he'll never afford a car like mine, not in 10 lifetimes. Hell, Mark, even if you sold your soul, you couldn't buy the tires of this Tesla." Everyone laughed. Mark forced a smile, his jaw tight. Later that night, after dropping Richard home, Mark sat alone in the car. The leather seats smelled of wealth. The glowing screen on the dashboard reflected on his face. He could hear Richard's laughter echoing in his mind. He leaned back, whispering to himself, "Maybe I don't need to own this car to destroy you with it." For the first time in years, Mark didn't feel powerless. A plan began to form slowly, carefully, dangerously. The man who treated him like nothing was about to learn that even just the driver could change everything. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about respect. Mark knew he couldn't rush. Revenge, if done too quickly, looked like anger. That if done with patience, it looked like destiny. The very next morning, Richard handed him the Tesla keys, as if tossing crumbs to a dog. "Take it to get washed, Mark, and don't let those guys at the car wash touch the rims. They're custom. Worth more than your yearly salary," Richard sneered. Mark nodded, hiding the storm that brewed inside him. On his way, he didn't take the Tesla to the usual luxury car wash. Instead, he parked it at a public charging station, right next to an old, beat-up pickup truck. Crowds of people walked by, whispering and pointing. The proud Tesla that Richard bragged about so much now sat in a row of ordinary cars. Mark leaned casually against the hood, sipping coffee, pretending not to notice as people touched the glass to peek inside. When he finally returned the car, Richard exploded. "Did you park my car in public?" he barked. "Yes, sir," Mark replied calmly. "It needed charging." Richard cursed, waving his hands dramatically. His face reddened with anger. "Do you understand what kind of people touch cars like this? Do you realize the fingerprints?" Mark lowered his eyes, biting back a smile. The first crack had appeared in Richard's mirror of perfection. The next week, Richard had a meeting downtown. He strutted out of the office building, talking loudly on his phone so everyone could hear his deals and millions. Mark saw the opportunity. As Richard slid into the back seat, Mark intentionally switched the car settings to chill mode, making the Tesla accelerate like a basic sedan instead of a rocket. Richard frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "Mark, hit the pedal harder. Show them what this baby can do." Mark pressed the pedal, but the car crawled. A group of businessmen standing nearby smirked. One of them muttered just loud enough, "Guess money can't buy horsepower after all." Richard's jaw tightened. His reputation, built on speed and power, had just been mocked in public. He yelled at Mark all the way home, but Mark only nodded, secretly enjoying every word. Revenge wasn't just about humiliating Richard in public, it was also about peeling away the layers of his fake image. Mark began to observe more carefully. He noticed how Richard flirted with his secretary despite being married. He noticed how Richard faked his tax documents. He noticed every weakness, every secret. One evening, Richard left his phone in the car while rushing into a restaurant. The screen lit up with notifications texts from someone named Amber, not his wife. Mark's lips curled into a thin smile. Interesting. Instead of snooping further, He simply snapped a quick picture of the screen with his own phone. He didn't need to use it right away. Patience, revenge had to mature like fine wine. The real turning point came when Richard mocked him in front of Richard's teenage son. "Ethan, look at him." "Ethan," Richard said, gesturing to Mark, "this is why you study hard. Otherwise, you'll end up a driver, working for men like me." Ethan looked at Mark, embarrassed. Mark forced a polite smile, but inside, something shifted. It wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about making sure even Richard's family saw who he truly was. That night, as Mark drove home, he whispered to himself, step by step, "Richard, I'll take everything from you. Not just your car, your pride, your family, your empire." And with that, the second stage of revenge began. The morning sun hit the polished hood of the Tesla as Mark parked outside Richard's downtown office. Richard was in a rush, barking orders on his phone. "Mark, stay sharp," Richard snapped as he stepped out. "Today's deal will make me $10 million. Don't screw anything up." Mark gave his usual polite nod, but his mind was already spinning. He knew this meeting was Richard's golden ticket, a deal that would secure his reputation with powerful investors. As Richard disappeared into the glass building, Mark opened the Tesla's dashboard and adjusted a few settings. He synced Richard's phone to the car's system, a feature Richard never paid attention to. Then Mark waited. An hour later, Richard came storming back, glowing with confidence. He opened the door, slid inside, and called one of the investors on speaker. "Gentlemen," Richard boasted, "you've made the right choice. Nobody negotiates like Richard Coleman. By next quarter." Suddenly, the Tesla's speakers crackled. A woman's voice filled the car. "When will you tell her about us, Richard? You promised last night." Richard froze, his face drained of color. Mark kept his eyes on the road, pretending not to hear that the car had already blasted the message across the entire call. "Richard," the investor's voice came through, icy and suspicious. "What the hell was that?" Richard stammered, fumbling with the buttons. That was a glitch. Just background noise. Ignore it." But the damage was done. His professional mask had cracked. Mark hid his grin behind the steering wheel. One seed of doubt had been planted in Richard's empire. The next week, Mark found another chance. Richard was hosting a charity gala, the kind of event where image mattered more than anything. The Tesla was meant to be the centerpiece's grand arrival. But when Mark pulled the car up to the red carpet, he deliberately scraped the bottom of the Tesla against the curb. A sharp screech echoed. Heads turned. Camera flashes caught the moment. The perfect car was suddenly imperfect. Richard's face burned red as reporters whispered and laughed. He hissed at Mark under his breath, "You idiot. Do you know how much you've embarrassed me?" Mark only bowed slightly. "Apologies, sir. Must have miscalculated the turn." Inside, though, Mark's heart was racing. Each move wasn't just about humiliation, it was about control. For the first time, Richard was reacting to him. Mark's next step wasn't about cars, it was about people. He knew Richard's wife, Laura, was no fool. She had grown suspicious of his late nights and business trips. Mark decided it was time to pour gasoline on that fire. One evening, while driving Laura to a social event, he casually mentioned, "Funny thing, Mrs. Coleman, last week, Mr. Coleman left his phone in the car. I noticed messages from someone named Amber. I'm sure it was nothing important, but I thought you should know." Laura's silence was louder than any scream. Her eyes darkened. Her hands clenched the leather seat. Mark didn't say another word. He didn't need to. By the time they reached the event, Laura was already scrolling through Richard's phone with cold suspicion. That night, Richard yelled at Mark, furious, "Did you say something to Laura?" Mark looked him dead in the eye for the first time, calm, unflinching. "No, sir. I only drive where you tell me to." Richard's rage boiled, but he couldn't prove anything. The power dynamic had shifted ever so slightly. Mark went home that night, lying awake in bed. For the first time, he didn't feel like just the driver. He felt like the one in control, and he wasn't going to stop until Richard Coleman lost everything. Richard Coleman had always believed he was untouchable. His wealth, his charm, his cars, all were shields that protected him from reality. But those shields were starting to crack, and Mark Davis knew exactly how to shatter them completely. It began with information. Mark had learned more about Richard in for years of driving him around than anyone else ever could. Where he went, who he met, what secrets he carried. Now, those secrets were weapons. One morning, Richard barked orders, as usual, his phone glued to his ear. He was heading to a high-stakes investor meeting downtown, the kind of deal that could double his fortune. Mark, no mistakes today, Richard said coldly as he slid into the Tesla. This meeting decides the future of my company. Mark only nodded, hiding the smirk tugging at his lips, because today wasn't about Richard's future, it was about his downfall. As they drove, Richard rehearsed his pitch out loud, bragging about his profits and assets. But what Richard didn't know was that Mark had already sent a flash drive to one of Richard's competitors' documents. Mark had quietly copied from Richard's briefcase weeks earlier. Tax evasion, fake invoices, illegal transfers, enough evidence to destroy his credibility. By the time Richard walked into the meeting, the investors already knew the truth. When Mark picked him up 2 hours later, Richard's face was pale, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word for the entire drive home. Mark could almost taste the silence. It was the silence of a man who just watched his empire collapse. But Mark wasn't done. That night, Laura Coleman confronted her husband in the living room. Mark, from the driver's quarters, could hear every word through the thin walls. "You think I don't know about Amber?" Laura hissed. "Do you think I'm blind? The late nights, the messages, I'm done being humiliated." Richard tried to deny it, his voice cracking. But Laura was relentless. "You've destroyed this family with your lies. Ethan sees it. I see it. Soon the whole city will see it." Mark smiled in the darkness of his room. He hadn't needed to push hard, just one whisper in the right ear. And Richard's own life was tearing itself apart. The next morning, Richard stumbled into the car looking like a ghost. His empire crumbling, his marriage in ruins, and whispers of scandal spreading through the city. He stared at the back of Mark's head, his eyes burning with suspicion. "You did this," Richard growled. Mark met his gaze in the rearview mirror, calm, cold. "I only drive where you tell me, sir." For the first time, Richard didn't yell. He didn't insult. He didn't even reply, because deep down, he knew the truth. The man he mocked, humiliated, and treated like nothing had become the silent architect of his destruction. That night, Mark parked the Tesla one last time in Richard's garage. He ran his hand along the shiny black hood. This car had been Richard's pride, his symbol of superiority. Now it was just another reminder of how fragile pride really was. Mark whispered to himself, almost like a vow. "You thought I was just your driver, but I was the one holding the wheel of your life. And now, I've driven you exactly where you belong down." The revenge was no longer a secret. It was complete. The Coleman mansion was unusually quiet. The grand halls that once echoed with parties, laughter, and Richard's arrogant voice now carried only silence. The newspapers had already torn him apart. Businessman Richard Coleman exposed in fraud scandal. Wife of millionaire files for divorce amid affair allegations. His empire was collapsing. Investors pulled out. Friends disappeared. Even his own son avoided him. But Richard still had one thing left: his pride. "Mark," he ordered one morning, his voice hoarse but trying to sound firm, "take me to the bank. I need to fix this. One last move, and I'll be back on top." Mark nodded, his face expressionless. The Tesla glided through the streets of Los Angeles. But inside the car, the tension was suffocating. Richard sat in the back, nervously scrolling through his phone, desperate for anyone to answer his calls. "Nobody did. You know, Mark," Richard muttered suddenly. "Men like me don't stay down for long. People need me. They respect me." Mark met his eyes in the rearview mirror. For the first time, he didn't look away. "No, Richard," Mark said quietly, "they feared you. That's not the same as respect." Richard's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to snap back, but then shut it. For once, he had no answer. When they reached the bank, a group of reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved into Richard's face. "Mr. Coleman, is it true you embezzled millions?" "Sir, what do you say about the affair rumors? Your wife has filed for divorce. Any comment?" Richard tried to push through, but the crowd's jeers grew louder. Fraud, liar, cheat, the words stung worse than any headline. And there, sitting calmly in the driver's seat, Mark watched the man who once humiliated him now being humiliated by the entire city. It was beautiful. That night, after hours of silence, Richard climbed into the Tesla once more. He looked broken, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "Drive," he muttered. Mark didn't ask where. He just drove through the city lights, past the skyscrapers, until they reached the edge of the hills overlooking Los Angeles. The view was breathtaking, millions of tiny lights twinkling in the dark, like stars scattered across the earth. Richard stared at the city below, his empire reduced to ashes. "Funny, isn't it?" Keith whispered. "All this time, I thought I was in control, but I was blind." Everyone used me. The investors, Laura, even you. He turned his gaze to Mark, his voice trembling. It was you, wasn't it? You ruined me. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't deny it this time. Yes, he said simply. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Richard laughed a hollow, bitter laugh. You were just the driver, he said. Just the damn driver. Mark leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. No, Richard, I was the wheel, and I decided where the ride ended. Richard looked back at the city lights, his face sinking into defeat. He said nothing more. The man who had once lived for power, wealth, and pride had nothing left, not even words. Mark started the car and drove Richard home. It was the last time. The next morning, Richard Coleman's name disappeared from headlines. Investors replaced him. Laura filed the final divorce papers, and Ethan left to live with his mother. The empire was gone. And Mark, he didn't stay. He returned the Tesla keys on Richard's desk, took his small savings, and quietly left the mansion. For the first time in years, he felt free. The revenge was never about money or power. It was about dignity, about proving that even the most invisible man could turn the mightiest empire to dust. As he walked down the street, the sun rising over Los Angeles, Mark whispered to himself, "Justice served, ride over." And with that, the story ended exactly the way Mark had planned.